All right. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to the installment of dot.LA Convenes, a speaker series devoted to empowering women in tech. I'm Kelly O'Grady, dot.LA's chief host and correspondent and head of video. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our partner for this event, Pledge LA, for being just as excited about dot.LA Convenes as we are, and for being so willing to help to put this on. If you aren't familiar, Pledge LA is a coalition of venture capital and tech leaders that work to measurably increase diversity, inclusion, and community engagement within the LA tech ecosystem, accelerating across and opportunities for all Angelinos. So thank you so much, guys. You are incredible to work with. So when we were thinking about the type of events that we wanted to put on, we naturally kept coming back to our mission here at dot.LA. So it's no surprise if you've been in LA that we've seen the development of a vibrant tech and startup ecosystem across a number of different industries. And that's where we come in at dot.LA. We're a media and events company with a mission of shining a light on the innovation in this very quickly growing community. So events such as today's are just one part of doing that. Obviously, we've had to switch to virtual, but hey, we're able to be flexible. So when we first came up with the idea for dot.LA Convenes, we were really inspired by the incredible women creating an impact in our community, but also acutely aware of the unique challenges that women in the space face. So our aim with this event series is to create a safe space to have really honest conversations, not just surface level, but honest conversations, build connections among women in these underrepresented industries, and through that, empower women in our LA tech and media community. I have personally been extremely passionate about this due to my own professional and personal background, so I'm truly excited to be a part of this discussion today. Now, a few housekeeping items before we jump in, just got to go through it. All attendees are going to be muted for the duration of the session. The speakers are going to be displayed on video throughout the discussion. You can do gallery view if you want everyone in the mix there. And then I really, really want to stress this. Our aim is to make this a two-way discussion. So we want to hear from you. At the bottom of the screen, you're going to see an icon for Q&A, raise hand and chat. So at any point, please feel free to submit questions, themes, whatever in the Q&A section, and we will make sure that we get to them throughout the discussion at some point. So if you want to share this afterwards, the recording of this event is going to be posted on our website by the end of the day. And of course, if you like this, please make sure to sign up and subscribe to our dot.LA daily newsletter so you make sure you catch every headline. All right, so let's get into it. I am so excited for this. The theme for our discussion today is ageism in the workplace. So older or younger, this is something that affects women at every stage of our careers. To that end, I have two really incredible women with me today. Cheryl Ingram, the founder and CEO of Inclusivity, and Heather Wexler, the founder and CEO of Q-Career, both rock stars in their fields and champions in the community. So how we're going to run this today is I'm going to first give you ladies the virtual floor, if you will, for a couple minutes, introduce yourselves, and then talk a bit about your experience with ageism. And then once we finish up that, we'll just jump back into a discussion around some key themes. So like I said before, anything that piques your interest, audience, even while Cheryl and Heather are talking, throw it in the Q&A section and we will make sure that we get to it later on. So Heather, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I will say, for ageism, I've had a couple of different experiences. And one of them was, before I started my company, I worked in, well, you probably don't know, but before I started my education technology startup, I worked in internet advertising sales for about 15 years. And one thing that and primarily for startups, right? So there was a lot of moving around because some startups were acquired and some went under, right? So probably I was moving around every 3 years, which is not abnormal in that industry. But as I was getting older, one of the things I noticed from the HR people, one of the conversations, became more about, are you willing to entertain at night? Because that industry, primarily, you're taking out young people at the ad agencies, and without them, and they would try, and obviously they can't come out and ask if you have a family or kids at home, but I would see HR people trying to weave that conversation in there as well too, so it felt like not just ageism, but also gendered ageism, because I didn't see that, they're thinking that a woman would want to run home to her children and men less so. And then on the startup side, I mean, luckily I haven't faced too much of it because education, technology, and workforce development, a lot of the founders do tend to be a little bit older, and the investors are fairly sophisticated in this space. But I have been around some VCs, who have said, oh, I won't invest in anyone over 50. Now, I'm not 50, but obviously we're all moving towards there. And that rubbed me the wrong way, to be honest. Like, I thought that was not really appropriate to say. It'd be like saying I don't, invest in anyone like, under 21. Like, again, it's like any sort of ageism, like too old or too young, is obviously not appropriate.
All right, so what's up, everybody? Am I good to go, Kelly?
You're good to go. Take it away.
I want to make sure I created space. So what's up, everybody? I'm Dr. Cheryl Ingram. I'm the CEO and founder, like Kelly said, of Inclusivity, and I'm a subject matter expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I work with companies that go anywhere from small businesses to large enterprise, worked with grassroots nonprofit organizations. I've worked in educational systems, K through higher education, in a number of different facets, usually as a consultant that's doing something with diversity, equity, and inclusion data. And so for me, I'll start a little bit, some clarity about ageism. So when we talk about ageism, what that means is that you are discriminating or creating a prejudice against someone based on their age that creates a negative outcome. So it's important for us to focus on the fact that the discrimination is leading to something negative that's impacting that person's identity according to their age. Okay, so remember that, because often when we talk about discrimination, we don't think about the fact that discrimination is indeed preventing someone from achieving something based on an identity or condition that they have. And some people can say that discrimination can be good or bad, but in the case of when it's an ism, the discrimination is always bad. Okay. All right, so when have I faced ageism? I have faced ageism a number of times, and mostly I'm going to speak from the perspective of the fact that it can happen to you when you are younger, but it can also happen to you when you are older. One of the first times that I really faced discrimination, I was in college, and I was doing an internship as a research assistant, and I was working in the state of New Mexico. I went to New Mexico State University, go Aggies, if there's any Aggies. And I was doing research, and at the time we were raising money to build the first early college high school in the state of New Mexico. So we needed to raise millions of dollars. And I was the person behind the scenes doing all of the research reports and calculating what the data showed us and how much each young student that would drop out or be pushed out of high school would cost the economy. So I was the number cruncher, and I had all the data, I prepared all the reports, and the woman who was the president of the organization, that was my boss at the time, was much older than me. And I remember she said, you've done the data, you've done the work, I want you to come sit at this table with me and tell these people about how you have found this data, right? So I go to this dinner with her, and she didn't really break down to me who was going to be there. So when I walk into the room, it's the superintendent of the schools, it's the governor that's there, it's the major person that's dropping most of the private funding for the project. So I have my research, I have all my data, I pop down at this table, and I am ready to talk. About 30 minutes into the meeting, I did not get to say a word, right? And everybody that was at the table at the time was much older than me. And here I was, this young 20-year-old Black woman sitting at a table, one being the only younger person at the table, but also acknowledging the fact that there were intersections there that could have also contributed to the fact that no one was listening to me, right? And so I was even reading the report, and it was like everything that I said was discounted unless my boss said it. So in order for them to hear it, she actually had to repeat it. And it was like a complete disregard for the fact that I was the person behind the scenes doing the work and had the information and the knowledge to really own that conversation. And I wasn't even getting the space to be able to do that. And so that's one way that I've seen discrimination happen in my position. And there are a number of other ways that I'm sure we'll talk about as we continue this conversation.
Well, thank you both for sharing those stories. I'm sure you could see the reaction on my face. It's pretty visceral on both sides. You know, the point that you made, Heather, about not investing with someone over 50, that's absolutely ridiculous. And then on the other end, that someone who's 20 years old doesn't have anything to say, even though they're the person that did run the numbers. So I think that that's a really interesting segue into this idea of the duality of ageism, right? Because I think a lot of time when we hear it, you know, I'm just about to hit 30. I think, oh, okay, that's not going to happen to me for a while, right? But that's not true at all. I think that I'd love to talk about this element of credibility that comes with age. You know, it's lacking on the lower side. You have it on the higher side. But is there ever a sweet spot for women?
I don't think that there is, in my opinion. The reason that I say this is because I usually work with HR when I go into companies and have to evolve their hiring practices to make them more inclusive, and their policies. And I'll give an example of like sitting on an interview panels and looking to select candidates to come into the interview process. I remember having to check people's asses. I probably should. Is it okay that I curse on this? I did.
Hey, it's fine.
I remember having to check people for both sides, right? Because what you said, Kelly, was really important about the duality of it all. And I remember looking in 2013, we were looking to hire someone in a technical position. Well, this man had an engineering degree from 1998. And when people at the table saw that, automatically you've seen all of the biases coming for this human being, saying, well, this person, you know, is tech going to be outdated because it moves so quickly. How are we going to know that what they have to offer is relevant, right? It was like this immediate discrediting of this person because of when they graduated from college, even though they had been in the workforce for years. And then I remember looking at another resume and the person only had a certain level of education, right? And so when they lay like, well, this person graduated from high school 5 years ago, all they have is a bachelor's degree. We should probably look for someone with a graduate degree, which is ageist, because if you're looking at when someone is graduating and comparing that to the level of intellect that they have, you're assigning a date to the level of intelligence that a human being has. And so there's both sides. When you're older, you get discredited. And when you're younger, you can tend to get discredited, or you can be seen as more relevant because it's up and coming. And that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think, you know, going back to, you know, female and the gendered ageism, like you said, is there ever a sweet spot, you know, for women, Kelly? You know, I feel like so many times employers are trying to figure out if a woman has kids, right? And just kind of making the assumption that they're going to go running home or have to help them with homework or, you know, soccer practice. And, you know, not only, I don't think like, do men get that, but you know, it's so funny because then you'll hear people say like, oh, we don't want women leaving the workforce and, you know, their valuable intellect that leaves and the brain drain. And, you know, but then at the same time, like during interviews, you know, I've seen it, you know, so often, you know, where people are trying to figure out like, well, is she going to be, you know, can she travel a lot? Like this job requires a lot of travel and she has kids, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I'm not saying it's, you know, necessarily easy for working mothers, but I mean, people have it figured out, right? Like you're not applying for that job because, you know, you're not going to be able to do it. And back to your point too, Cheryl, you know, there's working in education, you know, there's something out there now called the credential engine. And, you know, one thing that we're always pushing students to do is, you know, if you're going to get a degree, also get a credential, right? I work primarily, my Q career hooks up students to associations, both professional and trade, that have a lot of educational opportunities. And, you know, the great thing about the credential engine is like, you know, you could look at someone's resume and say like, okay, so he, you know, had this one degree in 1998, and it compares those skills. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all going to have to be lifelong learners, right? I mean, we're all going to have to keep getting new credentials because technology is going to keep moving, right? So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter when you graduated. You know, it more matters like, are you keeping up with the skills that are out there, right? And not like how old you actually are.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point about the credentials, because when you think about ageism, we also have to take into account how much credibility we add to a human being who has degrees versus someone who's been in the workforce for a really long time, right? And so what equates to, for example, if this person's been working for 15 years and they don't have a degree, but they have the experience, we have to be intentional about making sure that we create policies that don't discriminate against people because they don't have degrees. And so I think that that can be in correlation to ageism, because if you're holding it against someone because they don't have access, or they haven't had access, or you don't know what's going on in their lives, that's another form of discrimination that perpetuates ageism in the workplace, even through the hiring and promotion process for employees. And that's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, most people that are going to college now are not the traditional age, students age. There's more people almost going to school that are, they call them non-traditional students, right? Although like that population is starting to take off more. And I don't know, people don't always think about that it's a zero-sum game. And, like maybe you went to college, and you had a family issue, or you had a financial issue, and you're one credit short, right? Well, then you don't have the degree. Does that mean you didn't get the education for like one degree? Like it really is a zero-sum game, and people don't look at that, as much. Like I worked at a company called Deviant Art based here. It was a startup based here in LA. And for salespeople, I got in the habit of writing down BA required, right? Because that was the habit I was in, and I was the VP of sales. And the HR person, took it off, and I was like, out of curiosity, why'd you take that off? And she's like, the CEO doesn't have a college degree. He didn't go to college. He started the company when he was 19. She's like, so we don't require for any job here a BA, and it was really smart, because again, it's about what you can do, not did you, almost have the money to get a very expensive piece of paper.
Right. And on the opposite side of that, even for younger populations now, we see that we used to live in the era of, if you go to school, you work hard, you get a degree, you're going to get a good job, right? And then we had this generation where a recession happened, and that wasn't the case. And so what happened is that the world started to evolve in a way where younger people weren't focused so much on going to college anymore. They're going directly into work, doing internships through large tech companies or large companies, and starting to gain experience in other ways to create alternative avenues to employment. And so you see that, for students, we need to stop calling people non-traditional students. They're students, right? They're learners. And so you think about those things, and you get this pathway where we've labeled these people non-traditional, and then you get this pathway where we discriminate based on education for people going directly into the workforce, especially like you said earlier, Heather, you have circumstances where you needed to take care of family and you need money now. So it's important to think about that duality again, like you mentioned earlier, Kelly, about the older generations and younger generations, and how there seems to be this common institution that discriminates against them, right? And depending on your intersections, you face more discrimination than others.
Yeah, I think that's this question of education is really interesting. And I'd like to expand it a little bit to also the learning opportunities when you're at a company too, right? Because I think sometimes it also happens again. I've been in a position myself where, you need a couple more years of experience before we can invest in some of the company trainings or grad school trainings, that maybe companies pay for. But then on the older side, I've also seen companies say, you're probably going to be retiring soon. We don't want to invest in arming you with the tools to be on the cutting edge of whatever it is that's important at that company. So I'm curious on both of your perspectives. Have you seen this happen?
Did Heather freeze? Heather, are you here? There you are. Heather, can you hear us? I noticed that her screen had went out.
All right, I'll email her and see if maybe she wants to, or chat her. While I have a moment, I just wanted to say to everyone in the audience, there's a poll that came up, so definitely make sure you answer the poll. We're going to be using this in our discussion as we're going forth. But back to you, Cheryl.
Last part, Kelly, I want to make sure I answer your question in its entirety.
Perfect.
Can you repeat the last part of your question, Kelly? I want to make sure I answer.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, sure. So I'm curious if you've seen learning opportunities also at different companies be affected by ageism. Both on the younger side, but on the older side, maybe some companies not wanting to invest in someone that's older because, hey, they're probably going to retire soon.
Well, I've seen that. We see that happen so often in companies, especially when it comes to learning opportunities, learning and development, or professional development, if that's what you call it in your company. Well, I remember because we worked in a company once, Kelly, where they did roles, goals, and achievements. They're called RGAs. And so it's like a professional development plan that says, where do you want to be short term and where do you want to be long term? And I remember sitting at a table and having a conversation during a succession planning where someone said that someone's goals were too ambitious for where they are, like for their age, right? So this person was 26 at the time, and they said in their goals, in 3 to 5 years, I want to be a CEO. And what kind of professional development can we create in order to get me to that space? And they had all these things listed out. And the head person at the table said, that's too ambitious. You're 26 years old. You don't need to worry about being a CEO. And I was like, wait a minute, because people start companies as young as 15, 16 years of age, if not even younger. So who are we to say that because of this person's age, their goals are too ambitious, right? And then on the opposite side of that, I've seen it where people who are older have professional learning or professional development plans that want to learn something new. And someone says, well, you don't need that skill. Like, you're not going to be in the workplace much longer. Like, why do you need that new skill if you plan on retiring in 5 to 10 years? And these are debates that we've had with HR companies about why they need to invest in their employees.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Heather, welcome back. To catch you up. We're talking, we're taking this piece on education and now expanding it to how ageism impacts the learning opportunities within a company. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. But to just riff off of what you were saying, Cheryl, I think it increases that duality of the ages. I mean, if you're someone that's older that doesn't have the opportunity to learn the latest software or be trained in the latest marketing techniques on social media or something, you are even going to be more ostracized as, oh, you're out of date, you're not able to create value. So it's this chicken and egg problem. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Heather.
Yeah, so one thing that we're seeing, so one product we started working on right before COVID that we're going to probably put on hold for a little bit was actually an apprenticeship model. So what we were hearing from a lot of people was that students are not graduating college with the right skills. And we're like, okay. So, the apprenticeship model, when you used to think about it, like, okay, like plumbing and electricians, cybersecurity has become a very hot apprenticeship, especially there's a whole like apprenticeship youth initiative right now. The company is actually based out of LA, but it's for basically like 16 to 18-year-olds looking to go into cybersecurity. And to that end, colleges just can't keep up with that level of technology. That level of technology is moving so fast that, colleges aren't going to be able to keep up with, with some of that stuff, right? So those skills are going to need to be taught outside of school. Back in the day, companies used to invest in their employees and used to train them. If you went to IBM, they would move you around the company until they found a spot for you, right? Like, what's the best spot for you? And that is not the case anymore. Like, companies don't usually lay out that money. I honestly think there's going to be a resurgence in apprenticeships, hence why that was going to be one of our products. But in a way, it's going to accelerate because what's going on with COVID right now is going to break the education system, and for the best, right? Whoever decided that, a 4-year college needs to be 4 years with summers off, with electives such as PE. I went to SMU in Dallas, Texas. I had to take 2 PE credits. Why am I paying the amount I was paying to go to a private school to take 2 PE credits, right? So I think now that with kids are doing learn at home, parents are going to really question, what am I paying for, right? And then companies are going to start to question, all right, like, how do we invest, in employees? And why we like the apprenticeship model is what we see a lot too, is people that do apprenticeships. a lot of times aren't job jumpers, because an apprenticeship by definition is the learn while you learn model. You start here and you're doing, you're learning a skill on the job, which could be in tech, it could be in finance, it could be insurance, it could still obviously be in plumbing or, an electrician. And then you're also going to school. And I think we're going to start to see more of those models, and if that's the case, then hopefully, the ageism question, starts to dissipate. If we start just looking at skills and not like the piece of paper, but like more of like what a person is capable, is capable of doing.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It looks like you were about to say something, Cheryl.
Add to that the fact that, and we can dive into this a little bit more later if we get to it, but when we have this idea of people having to prove themselves in a workplace, right? Mm-hmm. And so you start to prove yourself from the minute you walk into an interview room, and people hire you because you have proven that you have the competency, at least in most cases, outside of nepotism, etc. And so I think that it's important for us, when you think about what it is that a person is doing. I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Heather, in relation to educational institutions even, and the preparation that we have in order to prepare people for their roles. I think that even some of the things that we're learning in higher education are outdated, like you said, right? And we're not keeping it up quickly enough, because we haven't built the systems yet to be able to evolve fast in higher education, which in itself is its own business, or paid education in general.
Yeah, Brandon Bastide, who I think he used to work at Gallup, and now I think he works at Kaplan, but he's written a lot of articles, I think usually in Forbes magazine. And he talks a lot about, he coined this phrase, which is just why I'm quoting him, because he coined a phrase called cred degree, and it's credential plus degree, and we've been talking about it for a long time, because again, we work with professional and trade associations, but like, that's why, one thing I was always super impressed with when I moved from the East Coast to California is, the community colleges that I was familiar with on the East Coast, are very different than like the California community college system. The California community college system is so impressive and amazing, and it's like, I feel like it's more, you get more bang for your buck when you're going to, and you also get to make, I don't want to say mistakes, but like at 18, a lot of students don't know what they want to do, right? So who can afford to go to, like, what is USC right now? Like 85, 90 grand a year, like something completely ridiculous. Like, who gets to go to school at 18 not knowing what they want to do, right? And like, oh, I'll take a English class, I'll take an art history class, right? If you're doing the, community college route, they have steps in case you do want to transfer into a 4-year, school. They also have a lot of industry credentials, and they do a lot of apprenticeships, and I don't know if people realize, but the California community college system is the largest college system in the United States. It's literally like 2.1 million students that go to, out of 114 schools, but it's such an amazing program. But then you also get to, and I really do think we're going to see, what Brandon Bastide, calls the cred degree, where you're going to do a credential plus a degree. But I also think you're going to see a lot more co-op programs like Northeastern, right? Where it's like, semester on, then you do an internship, right? Because it's really going to come down to experience, right? And again, like, hopefully this will start to negate some of the ageism things if we're really just looking at the person's skills.
Yeah, I think that this conversation about education is fascinating, especially when it comes to apprenticeship and succession planning and transferring that knowledge that is going to be lost when someone who's older retires. But I want to switch gears slightly, because we have a couple questions from the audience. And actually, I'm going to read 2 of them because they're a bit related. And then I'd love to have a discussion kind of about what companies can do, and if there are legal recourses, how HR can get involved when some of this discrimination happens. So the first one is from Vince Smith. Thank you, Vince. So he asks, is there a common outside legal path for a person suffering discrimination within a company if the internal HR resolution process breaks down? And so I want to put that in context of another question that was raised. And this is a terrible story. So I appreciate this person sharing it with us. It says, I'm 47. I was terminated last week after 2 years of working for an under 40 boss that kept telling all of my coworkers, who were all in their 20s, that old people are disgusting and that everyone with wrinkles should get Botox. He said that when he turns 40, his career in advertising will end because he will be too old. Meanwhile, of course, this person is embarrassed. Have you had something like that ever happen to you? Have you seen it happen? And I'd love to have a discussion about kind of when you face something like that. Going back to Vince's question, what are the legal recourse that you can take within your own HR and then outside?
So there are legal, obviously it is illegal to discriminate against age. And California, I don't know if both these people happen to be in California or not, but California has also pretty strict rules, right? So you'd probably go through like the EOE, to do it. Now, having said that, it's not always easy to prove age discrimination. And it could be costly, right? Because I mean, like when you're looking at it, like the legal recourse is really like suing the company, right? Now, again, like if it's a startup or whatever, sometimes it's worth them just settling, right? And not getting that press, if it's a startup, depending on who they're funded by, and, the VCs can picture the 40-year-old saying stuff like that, they might want to settle. But usually it would, it's not, unfortunately, it's not always, not a cost, it's, could be a costly pursuit. But again, there are resources out there, and I'm sure there's lawyers that, might even do it pro bono, but yes, technically there are legal recourses, and especially in California. I know a lot of the startups I worked for, when firing someone, we're very sensitive to it. So I've had a couple of cases where I had to dismiss someone. And at one time I was working it was a startup division within a bigger corporation. And they had a massive HR department. And the amount of hoops I had to go through before I was able to dismiss that person. And again, it was set up to protect, probably me as a manager, but also, the company. But I basically, in order to dismiss them, had to do, performance-based review. Like I had to basically put them on warning, and then I had to do 3 follow-up, like 30 days, so like 120 days out. Follow-ups of performance reviews, right? And then California is that way. I mean, like you definitely would have a legal thing. I mean, because I know for having been on the opposite side of that as well, is having to get rid of someone who is older. The company was afraid that they might come back and say that it was ageism.
There are quite a few things you can do. I'm going to try to be very succinct about this. So there are a few organizations that you can contact if and when you feel like you face discrimination outside of the workplace. You can think about the ACLU, where you file a complaint. If your company is EEO compliant, then you file a complaint there. You could also, ACLU, EEOC, and even the NAACP. So most people think when they look at organizations that have certain acronyms that apply to certain identities that they're going to be discriminated against, and that is not the case. And so if you, for example, need legal support and you don't have the funding to get that, go through those organizations because they tend to have alternatives for you if you can't hire a lawyer. There's also some organizations, and they're usually local to your city or your state, that will review your case for free, but you need to go look them up. And you may even want to contact your local bar association to see where those people exist, because even within law firms, there are certain lawyers who would do things that are pro bono, but you have to look really deeply for them. The next is if you're in a workplace, for example, if you're in HR, what Heather said was very true. Ageism is extremely hard to prove in a workplace. So you need some data. And what I mean by data is if you know that you're going to lose your job or that things like that are happening, you might want to look at if you have specific reports, or even ask someone in HR for data based on, and not revealing any employee's identity, but data based on promotion, tenure, pay, etc., on age, and look for those trends to see if indeed there are gaps within that company. If there are, they may not share that data with you, but if you request it and you document it and they don't share that data with you, then you know you can report that there's an issue, right? And someone might come in and do some sort of audit in some way, shape, or form. Also, if you're in HR and you know that you may have some sort of arbitration process or conflict resolution process, you should be creating policies for people to either use your company's legal representation in an issue where you have to do some sort of arbitration, because the person in HR could be the person that is displaying ageism, and they may not be the person that you want to go to. But if they're not, you want to have some sort of arbitration process where you can request legal representation on behalf of the company. Because what that does is says that this company is going to have to spend money if you file a complaint, and I guarantee you they're more likely to address your complaint if you go that route.
Well, I think both of, oh, go ahead, Joe.
And to answer your question, yes, I've seen this happen a few times.
Yeah. Well, I think those resources are, I mean, I frankly didn't even know that, there were all of these different avenues. So I think that that's really, really valuable for our viewers to hear and to keep in mind as either we experience it ourselves or see it happening to other people in the workplace. Another question that came through, so now we're backing up before someone has the job, right? So how does one handle a job search and the issue of ageism? I've had people super interested on the phone and on paper until a younger person meets or sees me. And generally I get no feedback. They just don't respond any longer, likely out of fear that they're going to be accused of ageism. I have extensive skills and credentials and even tech knowledge. I also don't look my age. But even if they think I'm 10 years younger, I'm still on the older side of what they want. Is there any advice? So I think I would pose this of, the larger topic. Okay, so we're on the older side, we're looking for a job. And I think we can also think about this on the younger side too, right? Of how do you prove your worth in the job search process, and how do you dispel those assumptions when you only have a couple minutes to make an impression with someone?
Yeah. I there's a duality here, because if you're from a company and you're in a hiring position, you need to know that the process that you create for candidates needs to be equitable and equal. Okay. And what I mean by that is you need to be looking at some of the language you put in your job descriptions that can turn off certain individuals according to age. So bias in language when it comes to ageism is important in your job descriptions. So you need to be mindful of those things for any identity, but since we're talking about ageism, that in particular. You also need to be clear about what the qualifications are for the job, right? And you're hiring someone based on a job. And the rubric or deciding factor for that job should be whether or not they meet those qualifications. I also am going to be very transparent about the fact, go where you are appreciated if you are a candidate, okay? And one of the ways that you do that is you need to do your research on a company. Look at who's on their leadership team. What do they look like? What kind of trends do you see, right? Look at the programs that they have to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, because those things will start to matter. What's that company's core value and mission, right? And how do they show up and actually support it? Are they living it daily? Every company now has a digital footprint. Go walk in that footprint.
I would say, to the person's point about like, I look it on paper and then I get in there and, they're like, oh my God, this person's older. I've had headhunters when I was looking for internet advertising sales jobs, like tell me, take off the year you graduated from college. And, and again, like I've been in the workforce a lot. I had a lot of jobs. Like my resume was 3, pages long. They're like, take off the year you graduated and but again, to the person who's asking the question, that doesn't help once you get in there and the person sees clearly how old you are. It doesn't matter if you look young or not, right? So how can you turn that around, and to Cheryl's point, like if you're, a lot of people are losing their job right now, right? And a lot of people are going to be looking for a job. This is where networking is super important, right? So I talk to students about this all the time. I have a book for students and it's called Who You Know. And, social capital is very important, right? And and the women I mentor and the women I speak to, I talk to about this to them all the time, because men are usually good at networking because they see it as climbing the corporate ladder. And oftentimes women are not, because for them, it has to be a genuine experience, right? And again, mentoring is a two-way street, so it can be a genuine experience, right? Most people don't want to go out and just either like find a mentor or a network. But to Cheryl's point about going where you're appreciated, most people get jobs by who they know, right? So, I mean, really one of the ways to combat, ageism sometimes is you have a friend that walks in your resume. Right. So, I mean, what you have to be doing is always, especially when you have a job, like always act as if it could, the next day you could be fired. Like you always have to be. Now, for the people who are unemployed right now, it's reaching out to old contacts sometimes, just, reconnecting. It's, taking some classes, online. I mean, there's so many great, back to like the cred degree and lifelong learning. There's so many things now that you could take where you get like the badge that you could put on your, LinkedIn, so I think also showing, that you're, one advice I would maybe give too, is like, if you're getting that vibe in that interview that like, they think I'm too old, right? Highlight why your experience and age is important. Like, I am a team player and I am willing to like mentor and bring up, and this is what I have that only experience will give to me. It's really about flipping that script a little bit. Now, again, like it might not always work, right? If it's like, I see this in startups. If it's like some startup where the kids are looking to play, beer pong or, whatever, it is, it's going to be what it's going to be, unfortunately, but using your skills. One thing that we're seeing with associations right now, a lot of people that work at associations tend to be a little bit older and have been in those positions for a very long time. A third of associations, so there's over 100,000 associations. A third of them are based in DC because a lot of them have lobbying arms. What we're seeing from our clients right now is a little bit of a panic because they're afraid that, after this pandemic is either done or people are ready to come back, that some of the older people might just retire, right? If they have enough money, that there might be like, like I'm not going to come back, right? So their panic is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all this institutional knowledge about like how to lobby. And, so there is a flip side to that too, depending on what the career is. If it's tech related, you have to prove that the latest, greatest coding and technologies that are out there, but if it's sometimes around lobbying and stuff, like age there tends to be a benefit, right? And people, but again, like to flip side of, Cheryl's thing, it's like, then they might see someone as too young. So it's really going to always be about highlighting why you're the best candidate, with the skills that you have. But it's hard, let's face facts. Like, we're talking about this because they're like, people do discriminate, but, looking for mentors and other people that are older, right? Because I can guarantee you that everyone who is older, has definitely faced it, so asking them how they've dealt with
it. And I want to add two very quick things. The first one is that, remember, an interview is a two-way conversation. And so don't be afraid to ask questions around ageism if you need to, right? So what's the average age of a person who works in your company? What's the average age of leaders in your company? Like things like that, you can send to interview committees ahead of time so that they have that information ready to answer for you by the time you get into the interview. So when you get that message, you say, hey, here's a time I can interview. Here's some questions that I have for the panel that they may need to prepare before I get in the room. Another thing is that I want to address about what Heather said about women and networking. And also we talk about women and men. I want to be cognizant of the fact that we haven't mentioned non-gender binary populations in this conversation. But from a woman's perspective who is in a startup, who is doing fundraising, sometimes it's hard for us to network because we've been traumatized by network experiences. So we have to be mindful of the fact when we're speaking about communication opportunities that marginalized populations, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, LGBTQIA+ populations, et cetera, tend to have negative experiences that make them hesitant to go to networking, because most of the people you are usually looking for to hire you or asking for a favor don't tend to share in the common identities that you have, especially if they're in powerful positions. If you're going into a large company and you look at a leadership team, most of them tend not to be us unless we founded that company, or we are the CEO of that company. So just be mindful of those things as well as you move through the world and attempt to find employment.
Yeah, there's so much I want to respond to there. You both just made some really excellent points. But I also want to get to some other things that we want to talk about. But I think that is a really good point that I'm going to take with me personally, just doing the homework, doing the research. What is it that these companies are promoting on their digital footprint? You know, am I going to be wanted there? Am I going to fit in there? And what you, Heather, said, like proving that whether it's my experiences that I've had being on the younger side, or as we mature in our careers, how that can be a positive. I think that's a really salient point to take away. So Cheryl, I feel like you were just reading my mind here of where I wanted to go with the conversation. So I love, even virtually, we can do this. So we started talking about networking, and one of the questions that we asked the audience is, let's see, I have it here on my phone. Is there more women can do to support one another in the workplace, right? A whopping 100% said yes. So, I think that really ties in well to this idea of networking and finding mentors. And so I kind of want to complicate this conversation that we're having around ageism a little bit. I know you wanted to get to the show. With how women interact with each other, whether it's women of the same age, whether it's older women with younger women, and kind of all the things that we can get into there. And one question, and then I will hand the floor over to you, that was mentioned by one of our viewers is 100% of respondents said that there is more women can do to support one another in the workplace. What specific actions can a woman take today to support others? And what action can a man take today to support in a way that it's not patronizing?
Yes. Oh, that's such a powerful question. I want to look that into the camera when I say this. Women, stop being mean to one another in the workplace, okay? And you have to realize that sometimes we get so traumatized by the fact that we've had to fight to get to leadership positions that we exhibit the same behaviors that cause us to fight in the first place and project those onto other women. You have got to stop doing that. And I think that there are women who are in powerful positions, and we have this thing, I'm in a group that we talk about sending the elevator back down, right? When you make it to a powerful position, or even if you're all on the bottom floor, how do you build an alliance and push one another up? And when you get there, you reach that back down and bring the other person up. And so I think for women, it's important for us to create those mentoring programs, those succession planning processes, those sponsorship programs. And let's be clear about the fact that a mentor talks to you, a sponsor speaks for you. So they have very different roles. I mean, we see now one of the most dominant practices I see happening are the women employee resource groups. So whether they're women engineers, lady bosses, et cetera, in the workplace. And I think when you build really powerful processes inside of the workplace and professional networks outside of the workplace that are intentional about giving women spaces to empower themselves, we'll start to see more change. And I think, without rambling on too far, that Me Too started some of that process to build women up in the workplace and stop some of the bullshit that we face on a regular basis. But there's also a lot of stagnation around the hesitation to hire women because of it. And so we need to work together to navigate both.
Yeah, and I would just, add on to Cheryl's point. You mentioned like lady bosses and some of the other groups. I think seeking out some of those groups. I know there's also one called Upward Women, and it's all for women at, in different corporate levels, and they do different events. But having a safe place to go that, like, if you do have an issue, at work, that you can go and talk to. Again, like I hope everyone knows what a professional and trade association is, because I keep mentioning associations. But, oftentimes within associations and those chapter associations, they sometimes do even have like women's groups. And we were doing an interview with a woman who worked for a metal association, and she was a flight test engineer at Northrop Grumman, right? So obviously, defense contracting, very male. That type of engineering, very male. Northrop Grumman, very male. And how she used her association was that when she was getting a promotion, and it wasn't something that aligned initially with her skill set, and she was almost thinking about turning it down, and she turned to the women's group within her association, and I think even like they probably do it virtually, because I don't know if they had, obviously I think it's in San Diego, but I think that for that women's group they probably do this, probably do Zoom. And, she was saying, like, I don't think I'm really qualified for this promotion. And, the woman in that group is like, do you think any male would say that? It's like men would be like, thanks for the promotion and the money, and again, it's like your employer, thinks that they could either groom you, or you have enough skill set and talent, to grow in that position. But she was saying how the women within that group talked her into it, right? So finding those groups, because again, like she could maybe talk to her friends about it, right? But again, what she was doing, with metals and engineering is so niche that she needed to find other women, that have that experience, so seeking out, like there's a lot of really amazing resources out there, but you have to do the work sometimes to find those.
Yeah, and this is a kind of a different perspective, but women, find your authentic selves. When you find your authenticity and you stand strong in who you are, that's a hell of a journey, one, to do, especially if you've been in a space where you've been oppressed most of your life, especially in the workplace. But when you get to a space when you start to discover that, there's this organic confidence that starts to come that allows you to speak your truth and stand up for other women and go where you are appreciated. I remember working with an HR director, and one of the things that we found is that women managers were also just as likely as male managers to offer other women lower salaries when they came into the workplace, or even during promotion. And so on the opposite side of that, if you're not a candidate and you're a person doing the hiring, make sure that you're checking your policies in the workplace to exhibit equality and equity for feminine candidates when they come through the job application process. You should be doing that for everybody. But because we're talking about women and ageism in particular, you have to make sure that you have processes in place to promote equal hiring processes. Because if you don't, you won't get to equitable outcomes. Or you won't get to equal outcomes if you don't have equitable hiring processes.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this topic for ages. And I want to go back to something that you had said, Cheryl, about how women need to be, not tearing each other down, not doing this queen bee effect of killing off everyone else. And there's a question that came from one of our audience members, and then I'm going to put into context of a story that I experienced. So Me Too movement has done some really great things for women, I think, but it's also, I think, as you both touched on, it's alienated a large portion of the population, that being men. And I had an experience where I was having a discussion with a male manager, previous company, not dot.LA. dot.LA is amazing. Previous company of mine. And, he expressed concern about not wanting to mentor young women, not wanting to be in a position where he had to have a closed door conversation with a woman because he was just afraid. And he was just such a wonderful supporter of women, but just so afraid of what was happening and the assumptions that would be made. I think it dovetails nicely into a question that I'd love, and it'll probably be our last question, but one of our viewers had, have you seen a general improvement in inclusivity with these movements, or has it made things a little bit more tough in the workplace?
Both. It's not like one's doing real well and the other is terrible. I've seen some places where, let me be clear, first, people have to be willing to stand up and face it and change. If you're unwilling, then you tend to be on the side of the polarity where there's more negative outcomes. But if you are willing, you have to approach willingness with humility. And what I mean is that if you are in the space where you are seen as the oppressor to a certain population, for example, men to women and non-gender binary populations in the workplace, you have to be willing to understand that there's a learning curve into your allyship, right? And so we have to do a better job within companies of educating people about how to be better allies in the face of different isms. And particularly when it comes to ageism for women, men, you have to learn how to be better allies. And women, we have to learn more about strategic advocacy in the workplace. And let me be clear, allyship means that you are supporting an identity that you don't have in common with that person. So you don't have a common identity and you are supporting their cause because they've been discriminated against. And then an advocate is a person who is actually a member of that group who is fighting for the right of that group to be treated fairly. And so when you think about that and you're creating programs and learning opportunities for advocacy and allyship, make sure that you approach it with both lenses. And to answer your question, inclusivity has been a hell of a task for many companies. I mean, we're even still in the space in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, trying to find a common language that is efficient for all of us. And so I would say that we've seen some great strides for some companies. And then we've just seen some companies fail miserably or sink when they tried to swim.
Yeah, and I mean, from startups, you still hear sometimes like, well, I don't know anyone that fits, like they give an excuse about the diversity, aspect of things. And we've seen it here in LA. Like I've seen a couple of companies recently get written about that, about having like the bro culture, right? And it's unfortunate. And, and I partially blame some of the VCs, to be honest. I mean, the VCs give these companies money and demand a board seat and then let them run amok, right? And don't hold them accountable, like diversity, like there's certain VCs where there has to be like diversity, like Kapoor. But, until we start seeing too, it coming from some of the people that hold the purse strings, it's still a fight, I think, for that level of diversity. And I think people's talking when we talk about this too, giving different analogies. So there's an analogy that I always loved, and it was I think when the Fitbit came out, there was another health wristwatchy type thing that came out too. I think it was called, maybe it was one of the Bluetooth or whatever, I can't remember the name of it, but I heard this woman engineer, speaking about it. I think she was at Pinterest at the time, but she used this analogy and she basically said, look, like that, they marketed that as a health application, right? So everyone would want to use it because it's measuring like your sleep and how much, and how much you walk, right? How many steps you take. She's like, all the engineers on that team were men, right? So what was the thing that was missing from the amazing health app, right? Because all the engineers on that team were men. Tracking the menstrual cycle, right? So as a woman, as women know, from the time you turn like 18, you're either trying not to get pregnant or trying to get pregnant, right? So tracking your menstrual cycle is very important. So if you're marketing something as a health app and you completely, right, and 50% of your population who wants to buy that, you're not measuring that, what are the most important thing to women, is it really an all-inclusive health app, right? And, and she's, it's a funny, a little bit, I don't want to say crude, but, it was making a point very directly where if you would have just had one woman on the engineering team, right? I mean, it would have been super comfortable to say like, hey, we need to track women's, menstrual cycles. But again, it's like they completely missed out on that aspect of the health app because of that, right? So when you're talking about diversity too, and one of the companies that have done the best job with this was Intel. So like the CEO came out a few years ago and said by 2020, I want the Intel to look like what the population of the US look like. And I think they got there by last year. And he said, you know what, like our revenues have never been higher, like we're doing such a great job. And it's because what diversity of the people, right? Everything from different age, different genders, different backgrounds, not everyone, went to Harvard, just everything, socioeconomic diversity, like everything. made the company better, right? So, I mean, also if people want to be selfish about it, right? Your company, to be able to succeed, needs to have diversity in age, diversity in gender, diversity in everything.
Yeah, because remember, diversity is not just visible, right? It's visible and invisible identities that you have. And all of them are important. But let's be clear about the fact that if there's homogeneity in your workplace, there's probably discrimination somewhere in your hiring practices. And so you have to make sure that you are accounting for all the identities, because what we see is companies throw the word diversity around and they don't know how to practice it or what it means in relation to inclusion and equity, which is why it's important to think about those.
Well, I think that was an incredibly powerful way, story point to wrap up on. I just want to take a beat to thank our partner Pledge LA for their help with today's event. And thank you so much to you both, Heather and Cheryl. I can't say enough how much I appreciate your candor and your willingness to share your experiences. I had such a great time today.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Finally, thank you so much to you, our audience. We're thrilled to continue connecting with you during this time. If you want more content from dot.LA, go check out our website, sign up for our daily newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media for our exclusive video content. And finally, we have more events for you. We hold dot.LA Convenes every other Thursday, but every Tuesday we hold a strategy session. We're going to be focusing on cybersecurity this week. We also run virtual pitch showcases on the Thursdays that we don't hold dot.LA Convenes, and our next one will be next week on e-commerce. For more info, sign up for either of those, check out our website. So thank you again so much. Stay safe. And thank you, ladies, for this really, really impactful discussion.